is a 2005 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited, better known as the LJ Wrangler. And it's the Jeep that nobody knows about except for serious Jeep enthusiasts who go crazy for them. I do too. I love this car, and I have waited years to review one. And I'm so excited the time has finally come for the quirks and features of the LJ Wrangler. Before I get started, big news, this LJ Wrangler is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This is the one to have Rubicon with a manual transmission, no significant modifications, and a rare Sahara model. If you're a Jeep enthusiast, you know how special this is and you can buy it on Cars and Bids. So once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this LJ Wrangler, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. All right, time for the quirks and features of the LJ Wrangler, starting with the rather interesting backstory and importance of this vehicle. So, everyone knows that the Wrangler Unlimited debuted with 4 doors for the 2007 model year on the JK Jeep Wrangler, and it changed the Jeep Wrangler world forever. That was the first 4-door Wrangler, that was the first Unlimited, and now virtually all Wrangler sales are the 4-door model. That's what almost everybody buys. The 2-door is kind of an afterthought. The 4-door is the big kahuna, and that was the original Wrangler Unlimited. That's what everybody knows, but it's not actually true. You see, the Wrangler Unlimited actually first debuted on the TJ body style, the TJ Wrangler for the 2004 model year, and that's this. The difference between this and later Unlimited models is this didn't have 4 doors, but it still kept the same theme. Unlimited meant more space, just like it did later, and this had extra space compared to a standard 2-door Wrangler at the time. Specifically, it was 15 inches longer than a regular 2-door TJ Wrangler, the LJ, and 10 of those inches went into the wheelbase, and 5 of those inches went into the rear, and it added significant practicality compared to the regular 2-door Wrangler. Didn't have 4 doors, but it was Unlimited. Now, the LJ Wrangler, the original Wrangler Unlimited, brought with it 3 major benefits compared to a standard shorter length TJ Wrangler. Number 1, it had more rear seat room. Not significantly more, but a few more inches of legroom for rear seat passengers. Now, the rear seat in the regular TJ Wrangler was never that small. It's not exactly huge, but there was space back there for your kids. Now there was a little bit more space, and that added practicality. More importantly, however, the LJ Wrangler added cargo space. The vast majority of the extra 15 inches of Wrangler was given to the cargo area back here, not the rear seating. And that was a huge deal because in past smaller Wrangler models, the rear seat took up most of the rear area and there wasn't much room for cargo, which meant that you had to decide between carrying people in the back seat or carrying cargo in the back seat. And so if you were going to go off on some off-road adventure with your family, you couldn't necessarily bring your stuff if you also wanted to bring your family, your kids. And the LJ Wrangler changed that. Suddenly you had a back seat and you had cargo space, and that was a huge deal, a total awakening in the Wrangler world. The other big thing that the LJ Wrangler offered was extra towing capacity. The standard TJ could only tow 2,000 pounds, but the LJ could tow 3,500 pounds, which was a pretty significant increase considering you didn't really have to give up all that much, just have a slightly longer Wrangler. The other really cool thing about the LJ Wrangler is that it had Jeep's famous 4-liter straight 6. Now, when the JK Wrangler Unlimited came out in 07 with 4 full-size doors, Jeep got rid of the famous 4-liter straight 6 and moved on to a more modern, more efficient engine. But Jeep enthusiasts love the old 4-liter because it is smooth, it is relatively powerful and torquey, and it is basic. It is easy to work on, it's easy to fix, and there's not a thing that can go wrong with this engine that doesn't have 37 threads on the Jeep forums with detailed explanations about how to fix it, how to work on it, and how to prevent it from happening again. The 4-liter was absolutely beloved, and later Wrangler Unlimited models, the 4-doors, didn't have it. So if you wanted more space and a 4-liter, you were getting an LJ. So you're starting to understand what makes the LJ Wrangler so beloved, but this particular LJ Wrangler is particularly desirable for a few reasons. Number one, it's a Rubicon model. Now, the LJ Wrangler was only sold from 04 to 06 before the new 4-door JK model came out in 07, only 3 model years, but the Rubicon was only sold in 05 and 06 for only 2 model years. Now, Rubicon was then and still is Jeep's top off-roading version of the Wrangler, and it came with some significant off-roading upgrades compared to a standard Wrangler or a regular Wrangler Unlimited. Specifically, it added front and rear locking differentials, which obviously is a big deal for off-roading. It added beefed up axles, Dana axles, to make it more capable if you were going through the really tough stuff. Rubicon also added a stronger transfer case, obviously a big deal, and it had a lower low range for better low-speed crawling over serious obstacles. The Rubicon also came with better underbody protection, specifically side protection. You can see this diamond plating along the side for the Rubicon models to make sure they didn't get damaged when you were doing serious off-roading. And Rubicons came with bigger, chunky tires for more all-terrain off-road travel. So not only did you get the 4-liter and the long wheelbase, but this one, you also got all the cool off-road stuff. And this gets even better because it's a Sahara Rubicon. Now, in Jeep world, that's a big deal because it combines all the off-road Rubicon stuff with the Sahara trim, which at the time was the top-level luxury trim of the Jeep Wrangler. And so that meant you got all the nice stuff and you got all the off-road stuff. Very few LJ Wranglers combine them. In fact, only 1,000 of these were made. There's even a little plaque inside the car showing that this is number 92 of just 1,000 of these Sahara Rubicon models. It's a very special and very rare version of a very rare version of the Wrangler. But before you get all excited about the luxuries of the top trim level Wrangler Sahara, you should understand that back in 2005, Wranglers and Jeeps were very different, and luxury meant something very different. Jeeps were still rather basic back then. As an example, there is no hood latch inside the interior of this vehicle. If you wanted to open up the hood, you just walked up to the outside, you flipped these latches to unlock the hood, then there was a latch under, and you opened it right up. You could get access to the engine without actually going inside the vehicle. Not exactly luxury. And speaking of inside the Wrangler, coming in here, let's talk about the luxuries, or lack thereof, on the inside of this LJ. These days, if you buy a Wrangler Sahara, you get big alloy wheels and all sorts of interior screens, heated seats. Well, back in 05, you didn't even get power locks. You walked up to the car, you stuck the key in the keel on the door, and you opened it up. And when you opened the door, you quickly realized that the door was held on with a hinge and a cloth strap. That's how it worked. Now, to be fair, that was a nice benefit because it made it especially easy to remove the door, which some Jeep people wanted to do, but it doesn't exactly feel like a high-end luxury. And look at the door panel. You didn't have power windows. You had crank windows that you would roll down. You didn't have power mirrors. There were standalone mirrors on the outside that you reached out to adjust. And even the VIN label wasn't put on in a very professional manner. It was just sort of grafted into this crease on the inside of the door where they had space, because that's just how it had to happen in this fairly basic stripped down vehicle. Now, you see all this and you're thinking, this was the top end trim level? This was the high end Sahara version of the Wrangler? And indeed, but you gotta understand that Jeeps have changed a lot in the 20 years since this was made. It's not a long time, but the Jeep world has totally transformed. transformed. When I was a kid, back in the 90s and 2000s, Jeeps were basic utilitarian transport. No one would ever think of using them as daily driving with families and kids. These days, with the advent of the four-door Wrangler Unlimited, that's totally changed. Jeeps made them smoother. They've given them more technology, more luxury, more equipment. They're easier to drive in basically any situation and on long trips. But back in the day, a Jeep was a basic vehicle, and you were lucky to get any amenities. And so even though this seems pretty stripped out by modern standards, back in the 2000s, this was a high quality, highly equipped Wrangler. And indeed, there are some nice amenities in here. For example, the CD player, AM/FM CD, that would have been a big deal in '05. Indeed, a very nice feature to have. You also have cruise control here, which is another nicety you didn't necessarily always expect on a Jeep Wrangler. In fact, same goes for air conditioning, which this Rubicon Sahara has. You can see that was not a guarantee on Wrangler models from this era. The thinking was they were open roof, they were often third vehicles, you drive them on the beach, they weren't necessarily for daily driving, you didn't necessarily need air conditioning. But this one has it, and it even has a little image of a Jeep on the dial that allows you to choose where the air comes out, which is a nice little touch that adds to the fun of your LJ. Now, another nice luxury in this Wrangler was you got not one, but two locking storage compartments. You had a locking glove box like most vehicles had, but also the center console, you can see, has a lock on it as well. Obviously, the thinking here was these are going to be open top vehicles that people could get into, so having lockable storage compartments was a pretty nice idea. And if you open up the locking glove box in this LJ, you will see the owner's manual pouch is not just a boring pouch, but instead it's this canvas military green thing that looks off-road capable and fits the persona of the Jeep Wrangler. Now, I looked through this owner's manual, nothing particularly exciting in here, although it is notable just how small it is. There's not that much stuff in this vehicle that needs an explanation. No screens, very few electronics, not much to have a manual for. But I also noticed in this owner's manual pouch, you have the original window sticker. And you can see the original sticker price of this Wrangler back in the day, and you can see also what the Sahara package added. Again, this is now the top luxury trim level, and it was back then, but it really didn't come with much. A leather-wrapped steering wheel, for example. And I forgot to mention before, but these are premium cloth seats, you see? Not just regular cloth. No, you got the Sahara, and you got the nice cloth. But anyway, next up we move on to the back seats, which, like I mentioned, was a big component of what made the LJ Wrangler special, that there was more rear seat room. And in fact, getting into the back seats was pretty nice because of this special seating mechanism that Jeep had. There's a lever here on the side of the front seats, and they called it the fold and tumble seat. You would flip the lever and the seat would fold forward and tumble forward, which allowed for easier access to the back. Now you get back there, you can see it's still not huge in back, but again, big enough for kids. That was what people wanted primarily, to go on a trip, an off-road adventure with a full family, smaller kids in the back. It works just fine. But the back is still fairly basic, fairly small, not much going on back there. You did have cup holders in back, which was a pretty nice touch. And you also had this cool Velcro pouch on the back of the front passenger seat for storage, which was also kind of a nice little feature if you had maps or anything else you wanted to put back there, but you didn't necessarily want them getting wet if you were cruising with the roof off. And speaking of the roof, let's talk about that for a second. You can see this Wrangler has a roof on it, but this is removable. This is a factory hardtop. It was actually a pretty expensive factory option at the time because it's a full hardtop over the whole vehicle that also included a heated rear window, a rear wiper with a washer. This was a nice thing to have if you wanted to use your Jeep year-round. Now, it can be removed, but it's huge, obviously larger than the one on the standard Wrangler, which is already pretty large and cumbersome. Taking it off is certainly not a one-person job, and when you have it off, you are kind of committed to removing it. So it would probably be something you would take off for a season, like for example, take it off in the spring, put it back on in the fall, not something you would want to do with any regularity. But if you have the roof on, let's talk about getting into the cargo area. To do that, you first open the rear door, which swings with the spare tire all the way open, and from there, the rear glass it's just free. You can just open it up or keep it closed or whatever. But you open it right up and then you get access to the cargo area. And like I showed you before, it is large. This isn't what I would call massive or huge by the standards of any modern big SUV, but by Jeep standards, especially coming out of the 90s, this was a major improvement in cargo space. And of course, that rear seat could be folded down and out of the way, giving you even more cargo space back here if what you really wanted from your Jeep was just more room and not necessarily more seats. The LJ gave you that as well. So by now, I've sold you on the LJ Wrangler. It has it all. The old school 4-liter straight six that's easy to fix and work on and find parts for. The longer body, so you had more rear seat room and more cargo space. You have the Rubicon for the off-road stuff, the Sahara for the niceties, and frankly, just a basic mechanically simple Jeep. This is the one. This is the dream. Are there any LJ Wrangler drawbacks? And as far as I can see, the answer is yes, there are two. One is the fact that, frankly, they're not easy to find. From 04 to 06, Jeep only made around 50,000 LJ Wranglers. That's a pretty big number, but it was 20 years ago. A lot of these have been modified or used hard off-road, or they've rusted away from years of off-road adventures in the backcountry. And so finding a nice one is a serious challenge these days, particularly if you're looking for a Rubicon, particularly if you're looking for a manual, particularly if you're looking for a Sahara. It just doesn't come up. The other drawback of the LJ was that it was a little bit more cumbersome to off-road the LJ compared to the standard TJ Wrangler. The smaller footprint is always better for off-roading. And so this one had a longer wheelbase, which affected what they call the breakover angle, which is basically like what size obstacle you can clear in the middle of your vehicle. And because it had extra inches tacked onto the rear, it also affected the departure angle, which is like getting out and leaving an obstacle, how much obstacle you can clear. The LJ certainly wasn't bad off-road, there's no question about that, but it wasn't quite as capable as a standard TJ with its smaller dimensions. However, that was a trade-off that most Jeep and Wrangler owners were willing to make, considering the benefits that it offered. But I am also curious about how it drives. I love a 4-liter Jeep. I love getting behind the wheel. I've never driven an LJ, so let's do it. All right, driving the LJ. LJ Rubicon Sahara with a 6-speed. This is cool. I drove a Carrera GT to the office today, and I am maybe more excited about driving an LJ. I've never owned a Jeep, but I'm into Jeeps. I'm into all cars, but I've always liked 4-liter Jeeps, as does every real enthusiast. And I love the TJ. I think it's a lot of fun to just drive around on a TJ or a YJ. And this is like the ultimate TJ. It's like everything about this is so wonderful. I love this thing. I love this thing. Even from 2 seconds in it, I love it. First reason I love it. Let's start with the 4-liter. The 4-liter is great. It's a great powertrain. It makes good, it's not particularly efficient, but it makes good power. It makes good power low. It feels smooth. It always has felt smooth. Every car I've ever driven with one, they're reliable. There's parts for days. They're easy to fix and work on. They were used for so many years. They're easy, good engines. And I just like a good 4-liter vehicle. And the engine after this, that went into the Wranglers after this, was the 3.8 liter, which wasn't a 4-liter, let's put it that way. And then the Pentastar came, and people complained about the Pentastar, but it had good power, and that was a nice benefit with the JK. But this was just, the 4-liter was just the right motor. Like, I didn't need a performance car engine. I didn't need much more power. This was enough because the TJ was a smaller, littler vehicle than the JK. And that brings us to our next point. The thing about this Wrangler that is so wonderful and so cool is that it gives me more cargo space and it gives me more people space without the 4-door situation. Now, there are drawbacks. The departure angle is a drawback. No 4 doors makes it a little harder to get in and out, but a 4-door Jeep inherently, I mean, it's a bigger, bulkier, more difficult vehicle to use. And so having the TJ, which was always sort of a little like a Lego, like a little blocky chassis, you could do anything. A lot of guys are still doing big mods to TJs, which was never as easy with JKs and JLs. And to have that, plus have the extra space for people and cargo, it's like the best of all worlds situation. And to have a 4-liter. as opposed to the 3.8, as opposed to the Pentastar. It's just like the perfect combination for Jeep people. It's the perfect combination of Jeep things. Now, driving it, it is rough. This is not for everybody. Like, the reason the JL has become so popular and the Wrangler has become so popular in the modern era, for one thing, the off-roading thing has become more popular, but also Jeep just made it more refined. So people who buy old Jeeps might be disappointed to discover it's not very refined. Like, it is rough in here. The shift lever is moving around. Everything is squeaking and rattling. That's how TJs work, you know? But that was what we liked about them, and that's when they had a much smaller buyer base, people who really did just want a vehicle kind of for off-roading or for like fun, sun, you know, beach cruising type stuff. Nothing they were gonna daily drive long distances like people frequently do now with Wranglers. Overall, I gotta say, if you're a Jeep enthusiast, what is not to love about this? You get the 4-liter manual transmission Rubicon, so you have the locker. I mean, this thing has it all, as far as I'm concerned, if you're a Jeep enthusiast. If you're just a person who wants a Jeep, get a JL Unlimited. Get leather seats, heated seats, a nicer ride, etc. And a non-Jeep enthusiast doesn't want a 4-liter. You want more power, you want, you know, more fuel economy, but a Jeep enthusiast who wants to maybe try to maintain one of these themselves, they want a 4-liter, they want a littler vehicle at TJ, they'll put up with some of the squeaks and rattles, and this is King Jeep, and it's so clear why that is. Being able to drive around on a TJ with extra practicality, with the 4-liter, it's got it all. This has just got it all. I love a good LJ, and this is a good LJ. And it's nice to get into this vehicle and know kind of, this is probably the car that taxed the 4-liter the most, and yet it still feels pretty eager and peppy. It still feels nice, it still feels fun, and it still feels smooth and drivable. It's a great powertrain even here. And so that's the LJ Jeep Wrangler. All the cool stuff, the TJ, but with more room for your friends, family, and cargo. For a lot of Jeep enthusiasts, this is the Wrangler to have, and you can buy this one on Cars and Bids. And now it's time to give this LJ a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 47 out of 100, which puts the LJ Wrangler here against some similar cars. I've always loved these LJ Wrangler models, and this one is really perfect. A manual Rubicon version is the holy grail. It's nowhere near as comfortable or as easy or as high-tech as a modern Wrangler, but its simplicity is really the main selling point, and the 4-liter 6-cylinder is the icing on the cake. I've always wanted to check out one of these LJ Wranglers, and this one is a treat.